Estamos aqui no CBM 2017 com Patrick Lai, que é do Business for Transformation. Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Good.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, we're so happy to have you here. We want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and about Business for Transformation.
Well, I'm an American. I've lived overseas, though, 34 years, so more than half of my life, and started out doing traditional mission work. And in doing that work, I realized that a lot of my efforts were actually working with Christians. And in wanting to get out and work with people who didn't know Jesus, I decided to explore the business community, and God really led me to start a business, and that led to starting 13 businesses overall, which actually 7 have failed. So don't think that, I succeed in everything I do, but in and through starting those businesses, we began to see people come to Christ and churches actually planted, and it's been very exciting to see. Very exciting. And that has grown from one person to now there's about 800 of us that are doing it around the world. It's been exciting.
Wow, it is really exciting.
Yeah.
And hearing you speak about Business for Transformation really inspire us to consider this. And we also want to hear some of your book. We know this book, his book, Fazedores de Tendas, has been translated into Portuguese. So can you tell us about the concepts of the book? It says, how do you connect business and mission? Is that it?
That's it, basically, yes. So often, the business community is overlooked when it comes to reaching people, transforming lives. We tend to think in terms of the church does ministry and the business world supports those who do ministry. But that's not a biblical principle. I mean, we see literally from Genesis chapter 2, where God tells us we are created to work, all the way through the Gospels into the Revelation, that our purpose is not only to glorify God, but to glorify God through what we do. And it doesn't mean just doing church work, but it means teaching school, selling products, engineering projects, whatever we do. Paul says in chapter 3 of Colossians, we're to glorify God. And we see that throughout Scripture. And so it's bringing together our life and our work in a way that is a witness to people, letting our light shine everywhere.
Can you tell us more about the concept of temp making, or what would be the difference maybe between a temp maker, a regular missionary,
Sure.
or how do you see
Sure.
all those things?
Those of us who are doing business are spending our days obviously working a job and interacting with people through the workplace. Before, when I was a regular missionary, I had to seek out relationships. I had to go to coffee shops and try to meet people, or I would ride buses and try to meet people, or exercise at gyms and try to meet people. I had to create opportunities to meet people. And I found that in meeting people, often I would see them once and never again. Or if they were interested in learning English, or they were interested in going to America, or they wanted something from me, they would become my friend, and we'd get to know one another, and over time I'd get to share the gospel with them. But it was a very unreal situation. People always wondered, what's your real job? Why are you really here? Are you with the CIA? People literally asked me that.
Oh my God.
But once I started working, everybody knew why I was there. You got a job, you're making money, you're here to do your work. Not only that though, but in the process of doing work, before, when I was a regular missionary, I would try to explain to people the concepts of grace, forgiveness, personal relationship with God. And other religions don't have those concepts. And though they understand the words, they really didn't understand what it meant. But as I began working with people, you have situations where people come in late and you extend them grace. You have customers who lie to you. You have others who cheat you. And they see you extend forgiveness. And in the workplace, they see you pray. They see you bringing God into everything you do. And all of a sudden, what I began to realize is people begin to actually see Jesus in me rather than just hear the words. And when you combine your actions with your words, it's very powerful. And over time, the coworkers would begin to come to me literally and say, why are you different? I really want to know. Can you give me a copy of your book, the Bible? I would like to read it. And rather than me trying to persuade people, my life was persuading people and drawing them to come to Jesus.
Wow. Can you give me some examples of places where you work and maybe some examples of where you've seen these lives impacted and maybe communities transformed or somehow changed by your presence?
There's lots of them. I mean, pretty much from Morocco to China, we've seen some exciting things happening. One story, I was just talking with this couple this morning. They're in Africa, and they went there because they really wanted to help reach women who were in slave situations. And so they started a hostel, and they reached into these prostitute brothel type of places and began to pull women out of these situations and give them housing, and they began to minister to them as far as their physical, emotional, mental problems. And in the course of doing that, they would share the gospel. And they developed a program that was between a year and a half. And as these women went through the program, it seemed very successful. And as they finished the program then, as they were released back into the community, they found that over 50% of the women went back into prostitution. In other words, it really wasn't working. It was a temporary solution, but it wasn't a long-term solution.
Yes.
And we find this with a lot of situations that we're working with enslaved people, is that if we don't provide a solution for afterward, they get in trouble. Yeah. And so the couple running this decided to start businesses. And today they actually have 6 businesses started. And so when these women are in the program, they start working in these businesses and they learn skills. And when they finish the program, they can have a choice of staying and working in the business, or if they want to reproduce that business in their hometown or some other place, they're loaned the money to go and start the business so that they can actually have a life. And they're finding, since they've solved that problem of employment, how they're going to support themselves, that they're having a much higher ratio, close to 90% success.
Wow, that's incredible.
It is incredible.
Yes. Another story, please.
Another story, sure. A good friend of mine, he works in Southeast Asia. He's got a funny background in that he literally was a philosophy major. He didn't know anything about business. But in going to this country, God led him to start a business, primarily because he needed income and he wanted to identify with the people as a real person, as I just shared. And in starting his business, as it began to grow, he was a little disgruntled because it's an area where there's a lot of Christians. And he was asking the Lord, why did you lead me to this place? And he was literally out prayer walking in the city, and he noticed a guy sitting on the corner who was a beggar. And he sensed the Lord was saying very clearly to him, that's your assignment. And he was like, well, what can I do with him? So he walked over to this beggar and engaged him in a conversation and asked the beggar, is there anything I can do to help you? And of course he expected the beggar to say, yeah, can you give me some money?
Yes.
But the beggar said, can you give me a job? And he's like, well, yeah, actually I own a business. I can give you a job.
Wow.
And so he hired him literally to be the janitor. Simple job. Doesn't require much education. And he then, through this beggar, began to get to know the network of beggars in the community. Many of them had one arm or one leg, handicapped in various physical capacities. But everyone who came to him, he literally gave a job. And if they worked hard, they'd get other jobs. And as they worked hard, they would get to work on the assembly line, and he would set that position to fit their handicap. And if they did well, they became a supervisor of other people. And if they did well, they got other opportunities, one of which was to learn English. Well, the first time I visited this factory was maybe 10 years ago.
What did they manufacture there? They
manufacture glassware. Okay? Stained glassware. They've done some huge projects for companies in North America, but they sell all around the world.
Interesting.
Today, but when they were starting, obviously, they started small. But I walked into the factory, and he showed me around the first floor, the second floor, the third floor, and we came to the fourth floor, and we entered a room that was not that big as maybe a school classroom, and there were 20 women sitting in, kind of desks with glasses in front of cubicle type of things, but you could see through them. And I said to him, I said, so who are these women? He said, well, that's my sales force. I said, oh, who are they selling to? Well, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, United States, English-speaking countries, and China. I said, wow, that's really cool. He said, no, that's nothing. Come here, let me show you something. And so we walked around behind these women. Not one of them had 2 legs. Many of them had no legs at all. One woman was missing a leg and both arms. She had a computer voice-activated headset that she was working through to do her sales. And as I began to get to know some of these women, because they all spoke English just as well as you do, I learned that every single one of them had been a beggar.
Wow.
Most of them hadn't even been to kindergarten. But by working in the factory, being given an opportunity, being promoted, they were now selling internationally. And one of them had earned enough money that she had actually bought a car and fitted it for her handicap. Several had tri-wheel motorcycles fitted for their handicap. All of them had been basically cast out by their family, and most of them now were actually making more money than anybody in their family, and they'd been welcomed back into their family. And this company, in the last 22 years, has won the company, the Employer of the Year award in a city of 2 million people. So it's had a tremendous impact on the politics and the way things work in the community. They've started 3 orphanages through the business, which if you'd come in, well, Western NGOs aren't even allowed in this country. And so we've been able to do those kinds of things because we're businesses.
In what other areas are you working with as businesses, or, you know?
We work in about 49 countries right now, not in North and South America, but pretty much the rest of the world.
But I mean industries.
Oh, industries.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, that's what I meant.
We have all kinds of businesses.
Yes.
I mean, there's over 200 businesses in our network, from factories to, you know, physical workout gyms like CrossFit gyms. We have restaurants, hotels, we have IT businesses, we have farms, we have beauty salons, we have all kinds of businesses.
Yes. Wow.
Schools.
And, yes. And what is the primary reason? Do you try to connect a need with the passion of the person who wants to start that business? How does that work?
Yes. Every business that we start, that we work with people, you're looking at a handful of things. One, if the person isn't passionate about it, you're not going to do it, because obviously you're going to be working 60 hours a week. Starting
a business is hard enough, right? It is
hard work, that's right. And so if you're not committed to it, if you don't love doing it, you don't want to do it. Yes. In fact, I had a situation where a guy had started an English language school in a country in Central Asia. And when I first met him, I couldn't figure out why he was dissatisfied with it. It was making money. People were coming to Christ through the school that he had started. But when I visited him and I saw the situation, I asked him the question. I said, why did you start an English school? And he said, well, that's what I was told was the best way to get into the country. And I said, well, do you love teaching? He said, I hate it. I said, well, I think I know why you're struggling. And so he sold the school and he started a travel business, which he loves, and he's doing great today.
Wow.
So you have to have a passion for the business. The second thing is it has to be a business that the community and the government wants there. You know, you don't want to create something that is offensive or isn't something they're wanted. A third thing is we want our businesses to employ lots of people. We don't want a business where you just hire 1 or 2 people, because we're finding it's the time that we spend with people, working with them, that they see our lives, that they see grace, forgiveness, love, that personal relationship with Jesus. That's what turns them to come to faith. And so the more people we have working, the more people, obviously, that we get to impact. For example, with all of those, the handicapped people that were employed, those 20 women, every single one of them had a testimony and had come to faith.
Wow.
I know. It's just amazing.
It's so inspiring.
It's a lot of fun.
Yes, it's incredible, because one of the messages that you gave yesterday in your plenary session was precisely about this need that people have for dignity in terms of work, right?
That's correct.
And we see how much that means here in Brazil right now. We're facing a political, economical crisis that affects jobs as well.
Yes.
And so hearing you talk about how people are finding this meaning through work is so amazing. And you also talked about how the Bible talks about work in this sense. Can you share more about that?
Well, sure. I think one of the things that we miss out on a lot, I mean, from the Old Testament, understanding that in Genesis chapter 2, we're created to work. That's before we sin, okay? Work is not sin. Work is not bad. We are created to work. But going through the Bible, coming to Jesus in the Gospels, over 2/3 of his parables are about work-related things. About 3/4 of the situations where we see him teaching, he's actually in the community, in workplace environments. The context of what he teaches us is taking place in the workplace, not in a synagogue, not in some religious setting, but it's in the real world, real life, in the workplace. And we tend to overlook the context of Jesus' teachings and focus on the content of his words. Now, obviously, that's important too.
Yes.
I'm not saying that one is more important than the other, but when we understand the context of what he's saying, often it changes the meaning of what we're actually hearing.
Yeah.
One example of that would be like the parable of the sower, okay? Most people think the parable of the sower has something to do with how we sow the word. I don't think so. Because Jesus' audience, the majority of people were, well, at least 50% were farmers. It's an agricultural society.
Yes.
When you think about a sower dumping seed on hard soil, on thorny soil, on stony soil, and thorny soil, no farmer is going to waste seed like that. As I study the context, I realized Jesus was actually telling a joke. And the audience is laughing.
Yes.
Because they realize that's not going to happen.
But nobody works with farming nowadays so nobody understands it.
Nobody understands that. What is Jesus talking about? He's not talking about sowing. He's talking about plowing. We have to prepare the soil before we drop the seed. No farmer goes onto hard soil and just starts sowing. He plows it. No farmer sows seed on stony soil. He gets the rocks out. No farmer sows on thorny soil. He gets the weeds out. He gets the soil ready. Then he drops the seed. Then he sees the 30, 60, 100% yield. The issue is, what is plowing for us? Well, I believe it's living our life with people. It's helping them to see. It's not us changing our strategies for reaching people, but us working to change their perceptions of who Jesus is, changing the perception of what a Christian is, what the church is.
Yes.
Because as they change their perceptions, they suddenly begin to say, I want the seed.
As I'm hearing you speak, I'm thinking that you're talking about cross-cultural settings. Most of the stories that you mentioned are those. But I have a strange feeling that we could apply that here too, don't you think?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Could you give us some recommendations or, I don't know, suggestions on that?
Well, one of the things that we tell the guys overseas, but I've learned in working with North Americans that it's as much needed here, is whatever you do Sunday morning, do it Monday through Friday. If you pray before you eat, pray in the workplace. Learn to pray in the things that you do in the workplace. Let people see you pray. Have a Bible on your desk or wherever you work so that people can see that Bible is important. Every morning when I come into the office, I first pull out my Bible and I spend 1 to 3 minutes just reading it and praying for a few minutes. I have my devotion at home before I go to work, but I do that as a witness to my coworkers so they see that the Bible is truly the most important thing to me and that I want to center my day and my thoughts around the Bible. And so pray, utilize the Word. If you have a cubicle or if you're the owner of a business, get some posters. Put them up on your wall. In fact, I recommend get 12. Every month, change them.
Yes.
Because people will read them, they'll notice them, they'll comment on them.
Yes.
You can do that. There's so many things. We actually have an 8-hour training that we do. In fact, a church here in Sao Paulo has invited me to come back next year and do that training. I'm not sure that'll work out, but that's another story.
And my last question is, if you had to talk to a kid who's maybe 16 trying to figure out what, they left a missionary conference like this,
Right.
very much impacted, thinking that they want to give their whole lives to God and they have a missionary calling.
Right.
What would you say to them? How could they start right after high school?
Sure. Let me use my son as an illustration. He had a choice to make whether to go to a Christian school or go to a large secular university. He chose to go to a large secular university, and when he was asked why, he said, "The Christian school doesn't need me. The secular university does. The secular university needs the witness of Jesus." He also added to that, he said, going to a Christian school is like going to boot camp. Going to a secular university is like going to war. As someone who's recruiting people to work overseas, do I want people who've been to boot camp or people who've been to war? So for parents, as you're watching this, I know it's scary sometimes to think about sending your child to a secular university, but if they have a strong faith, they'll get stronger at a secular university. If they don't have a strong faith, yes, they might lose it. But the Bible teaches us it is better to be hot or cold and not lukewarm. And so many of us as parents simply want our children to be lukewarm. But that makes Jesus sick. And so let's train our people, our children, to be hot for Jesus.
Yes. What would you say in terms of passion, for example? Sometimes people struggle with that, right? They will say, wow, I have a passion for social work, but I think that I should maybe study theology, for example, and not social work. What would you say about that?
Well, I was just asked the question just a few minutes ago by a guy downstairs who said, I want to get a graduate degree. Should I get a degree in theology? He already has an undergraduate in business. He's already working in the business community. And I said, no. Why don't you get a degree in international business, a master's degree, an MBA? Because it'll teach you many similar principles as far as working cross-culturally. But from a theological standpoint, as you're doing business, as people come to Christ, it's your life that's going to really impact them.
Yes.
And if we need to start a church and we need theological teaching, there are many people who will come and provide that teaching. What we don't have are the evangelists and the disciple makers on the ground who are really willing to work with people. From my experience, most of the people who go to seminary and graduate with seminary expect to use their seminary degree. So they're not going to do the evangelism, they're not going to do the basic discipleship because you want to use your education. And so let's learn the things that will help us to really endure ourselves to people, and that is coming alongside them, letting us see our lives, and loving them in that process. That is how we can glorify God, I believe, in the greatest possible way.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, we pray that God will continue to open doors for your ministry and to bless everything you're doing and to awaken more people to this wonderful need of getting our hands in business so that we can glorify God in our lives.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.